I will use this momentary lull in conversation to get started. Strike while the iron is hot. So, tonight in a minute, where we get started, we're going to be starting at the beginning of Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4. By way of introduction, sort of catching us up, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the stories we've already seen, and this will lead into some of the stories we're about to read in Matthew, and some connections they may have to other stories that we read years and years ago when we were at the beginning of the Old Testament. But to sort of real quickly run through, what I wrote here is sort of a real brief sketch of the early history of Israel. Right? We start in the Old Testament. Of course, everything sort of starts with Adam, in terms of people at least. So we had the story of Adam and Eve and their sin in the garden and their exile. And we're in the Old Testament. We talked about how that image of the two of them being created, placed in the garden, given everything by God, and then choosing to go their own way and losing it all, was sort of the story that set the paradigm that we kept seeing over and over and over again in the Old Testament. God saving his people out of Egypt, bringing them to the land. They chose to go their own way. They ended up in exile, sort of on a big scale. And then even on a smaller scale, David had been a poor shepherd boy. God takes him, makes him the king of Israel, right? And he chooses to murder a man and take his wife, right? Falls into sin, ends up losing his kingdom and having to flee from his own son, to go after. So we see this story over and over and over again. The stage sort of gets set right at the beginning of Genesis. And later on in Genesis, starting with chapter 12, of course, we had the story of the beginning of Israel as a family, right? Starting with Abraham, and then his son Isaac, and then Jacob and Joseph, right? We read the story of their families. We saw them again, of course, in the genealogy at the beginning of Matthew, that Christ himself is a part of this family. And then with Joseph, remember, at the time of Joseph and his brothers, there was a famine in Canaan. And so his brothers, being jealous of him, sold him into slavery, and he ended up in Egypt. And God used that to bring the whole family to Egypt, remember, originally to save them from that famine. Because Egypt had the capacity at that time to store grain, so they were able to ride out that famine, whereas as nomads, they wouldn't have been able to. So they ended up in Egypt at first, for a good reason, right, to be protected, and then they end up becoming slaves in Egypt. And that leads into the Exodus, where God brought them out of Egypt, brought them to Mount Sinai, where he gave them the law, or the Torah, gave them his teaching, gave him his first covenant. We've talked about covenants before a lot, but that he said to them, I am the Lord your God. Here's what I have done for you, and I'm still doing for you. Here's what I expect from you in return. Right? He gave them the law, because right from the beginning they decided they didn't really want to follow that law. They ended up wandering in the wilderness for 40 years until that first generation died off. And then it was the next generation that Joshua led, remember, into the land of Israel to conquer it, right? To take it away from the people who were dominating it at the time, who were wicked, and to establish God's kingdom. Now we've already seen a few things just in these first 3 chapters of Matthew. Remember when Herod set out to kill after Jesus was born, Herod set out to kill all the children so he wouldn't have any rivals to his throne. Remember, Jesus Even Father Joseph has that dream that says what? Go to Egypt. Go to Egypt. Right? To protect the Holy Family. Right? So we saw that connection there. Remember when they came back, Matthew quoted, "Out of Egypt I have called my son," and we talked about how originally that was talking about Israel, right? But now it was also talking about Jesus. And we saw out in the desert by the Jordan River, right? We saw St. John the Foreigner, St. John the Baptist, out there baptizing people in the Jordan River. And then Jesus, whose name, as we pointed out, in Hebrew and Aramaic is Yehoshua. It's the same name as Joshua. Right? Came through the Jordan River. Right? And how that was sort of symbolic of the fact that Christ was also coming to take back. Right? That John had put together this new people for him who had been baptized and purified, and now Jesus is going to lead them to take back not just that land, but the whole world from those who control it now, to become the kingdom of God. So we see this pattern developing in the Gospel according to Matthew, where over and over again, and we're going to see this again tonight, he presents Jesus as coming, experiencing what Israel experienced, but succeeding where they failed. Right? Succeeding where they failed. Where things went wrong, where they chose to go their own way, Jesus chooses instead to follow God. Right? And what that's pointing to is, remember what the original purpose for Israel was in the Old Testament. Right? A lot of people get confused about this. They say, okay, well, the Israelites, the Jews, they were the chosen people. That means God loved them more than everybody else in the world. No. It's not what that means, right? Or God chose to save them and to send everybody else to hell. No, that's not what that means. He chose them to have a special purpose. He chose them to give them His law, to give them His teaching, so that they would live by it. And then when they lived by it, all the other nations of the world would see them and see how they lived and see a different way to live and want to have what they had and come to worship the true God as well. So Israel was chosen, but they were chosen to be a light to all the other nations. Right? So that all the other nations would come to worship God. So when St. Matthew is showing us Jesus goes through these same things and succeeds where Israel fails, what he's ultimately pointing to is the fact that Jesus is going to overall succeed where Israel failed. That mission that Israel was given, right, to be a light to the whole world, to reveal God to the whole world, is a mission that Christ is going to succeed at in the course of the gospel. So that, a way to summarize some of the stories we already read, and this is something to pay attention to now as we go forward. And we read some of these stories. Because what St. Matthew does is he drops in these little details that are supposed to remind us, right? Remind us of things in the Old Testament. They're supposed to take it, oh, that's like when, right? And so be looking for those little details as we go, and those connections. So unless anybody has any questions right off the bat, we'll get started in chapter 4. So chapter 4, verse 1. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And I'll stop right there. We already have one of those little details. It's easy to read over it real fast. Right? Jesus was led out in the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Okay, Jesus went out in the desert. He went out in the desert. But look at the details. How did he get in the desert? Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. Right? When the people of Israel went into the wilderness, do you remember how they got there and how they knew where they were going? They had a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of cloud during the day, right, that led them, that represented the presence of God. So when it says the Holy Spirit led him into the wilderness, this wasn't just he wandered off to pray by himself, right? When it says the Holy Spirit led him into the wilderness, we're supposed to think back, the way the Holy Spirit led Israel into the wilderness. Okay. And notice the second piece. To be tempted by the devil. That's why he went there, is what that's saying. Right? It isn't he went out there and it just so happened that the devil took that opportunity to come and tempt him. He went out there deliberately, right, to have a showdown. Right? To have a showdown. Because how, all through the Old Testament, God describes the experience that Israel had in the wilderness as a time of testing for them. Right? He compared it to refining precious metal. Right? You go and you mine up some gold or some silver. Right? You've got gold and silver, and you've also got a whole lot of other junk. Right? All mixed into it. In order to separate them out and to get the gold and the silver you want and get rid of the other junk you don't want, you have to go and you have to apply a whole lot of heat. Right? You have to melt it down. It burns off what you don't want. And then you purify the gold or the silver and you take that. That's how God talks about what happened with Israel in the wilderness. Right? Those who were faithful to him, right, prospered during that time, during that 40 years, so that he had a people who he was ready to bring into the land. Right? He had a generation of people who were purified by that experience and ready to go. Right? Who were made holy by that experience, who were ready to go. And the others, the people who had other motives, right? The people who weren't ready to follow him, the people who didn't trust him, the people who didn't believe in his promises, well, they ended up dead in the wilderness. So Jesus is going out into the wilderness, the way Israel did, to have exactly that kind of refining experience. Right? That's what this is telling us. Right? He's not just going out there because, he's sick of people and wants some peace and quiet so he can pray. Right? He's going out there deliberately to have this experience. And if you read in the fathers, the monastic fathers, especially the early monastic fathers, we would call the desert fathers. Right, St. Anthony the Great, St. Macarius the Great, they did essentially the same thing. The reason they went out into the Egyptian desert wasn't that they just didn't like people, right? And they were grumpy old hermits, right? Living on the mountain, no trespassing, right? That's not why. They went out there because they wanted to seek God and they wanted to purify themselves. And they knew that as long as, like you and me, they lived in the world, they're going to have 5 things going on. They're going to want to pursue God. They were going to want to come to know Christ, but they were also going to have to work for a living. Right? They were also going to have to interact with people every day. They were also going to have social responsibilities, family responsibilities. Right? All these other things. Right? They were going to keep them from pursuing that. And so they went out into the desert because they said, we're going to apply some heat. We're going to apply some heat, and we're going to try and get refined, right? And if you read, they do not describe it as a pleasant experience. They do not say, I went out in the desert, boy, it was great, best thing I ever did. Right? Good times, finally nobody annoying me, finally no neighbors playing loud music, right? They go out in the desert, they talk about how they were tormented, right? How when they go out in a cave, and if you don't believe this is true, sometime get away from everybody. Just go sit in a room. See how long you could just sit there with your own thoughts. Right? See how long you could just sit there with your own thoughts and no other input. Not reading anything, not looking at anything. Just you and your thoughts. Right? Well, they did this for years at a time. Right? Sitting in a cave, just them and their thoughts. Right? And I can do about 90 seconds, personally. And then I want to watch, DVD of Breaking Bad or something. But But for years, right? Okay, so Jesus goes out seeking this, right? St. John has prepared this people for him, right? Who are about to become his first group of disciples, right? And now he's preparing himself. He's preparing himself. So verse 2, and when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, afterward he was hungry. That would seem to go without saying. Right. But notice the 40. Remember, how long was Israel in the wilderness? 40 years, right? Well, Jesus doesn't have 40 years to spare right now, but we have 40 days, right? And it's important, it says 40 days and 40 nights, because even at that time, there was the practice in Middle Eastern cultures, which still happens in Islam today, where they don't fast at night. Right? They fast during the day, and then at night, they eat whatever they want. Well, this is making clear, Jesus didn't eat anything all day or all night. Right? So, this is real deal fasting. Right? I complain that I have to eat, salad on Wednesday and Friday. Right? This is nothing. Nothing. And so afterwards, he's hungry. Verse 3, now when the tempter came to him, he said, if you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread. Okay, so this is the first reach into the bag of tricks for the devil. Right? Not a lot of food around here, plenty of rocks. So why don't you turn some of these rocks into some food? Why does he go there first? Well, if we go all the way back to Exodus, what was the very first problem as soon as Israel went out in the desert and left Egypt? What are we going to eat? Right? We're hungry. And they didn't just say, oh, what are we going to eat? And then somebody else said, oh, well, we'll just trust Moses. He knows what he's doing. Right? God brought us out here. He'll provide for it. No. It was, Moses brought us out here to die in the desert. Let's kill him and go back to Egypt. Right? They immediately went there. If we kill him, maybe Pharaoh won't be so mad at us because we got rid of Moses. We could go back because we were slaves, but at least we had food. At least we had food. That quick. Right? So, the devil comes to Jesus with the same temptation. You've got no food. Right? The devil happens to know that Jesus is God, so he can turn rocks into food if he wants to. Right? So, he says, make yourself some food. Right? Make yourself some food. Take this into your own hands. Right? Don't trust your father. Take this into your own hands. So verse 4. But he answered and said, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So, you say, well, that's kind of clever. Right? But he still needs to eat. Right? But the point here is, notice it's man shall not live by bread alone. It's not man shall not live by bread. Right? It's man shall not live by bread alone. Right? Meaning, our physical life, right, is real. We have to eat. But our spiritual life, right, is more important. So what Jesus is really saying here ultimately is, it would be better for me to follow God, to follow my Father, and die here in the desert, than to eat and disobey him, than to eat and distrust him. That's what he's really saying there. If I have to choose one or the other, I'm going to follow him and die in this desert. Which is very different than how we normally look at faith. Right? This was the whole time I was growing up as a kid. Maybe this is just my relatives. I don't know. But you tell me. The whole time I was growing up as a kid, anytime I made some comment, like, well, what if this bad thing happens? Shouldn't we figure something out in case, right? In case somebody gets hurt and can't go, in case this happens. I would always get from my relative, don't you have any faith? Don't you have any faith? Faith means you just believe that nothing bad is going to happen, right? Faith is that, I just believe God's going to take care of me and nothing's ever going to go wrong. Well, that's not faith the way we see it in the Bible. Remember the three youths, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, before they get thrown in the fire. Right? They say to Nebuchadnezzar, we know that our God can protect us even if you throw us in this furnace. But even if he doesn't, even if you throw us in there and we burn to death like expected, right? Even if that's what happens, we're still going to obey him and not you. And that's what Jesus is reiterating here. Faith means that we follow God, right, and we do what's right, even if that means suffering in this life. Even if that means bad things happening. Even if that means our death. And that's what all of the martyrs did. That's what all of the martyrs did. So faith is about believing that God's promises are true so that we follow him and believe in those promises regardless of what happens to us in this life. Right? Christ has promised that if we follow him, right, that he will raise us up on the last day. That though we die and go into the ground and our body rots, that he will raise us up again and we will live with him forever. By a faith, that means I believe that that is true. And if I believe that that is true, then it doesn't matter if someone threatens to kill me now. Because I know, okay, you can kill me now. But I know that Christ is going to raise me up on the last day and I'm going to live with him forever. Or you may make my life really miserable right now. Right? My life may be real miserable for years. Right? I may suffer a long time and suffer very badly. But I know that Christ is going to raise me up on the last day, and that's going to be forever. So whatever pain, whatever suffering, whatever loneliness, whatever I have to go through right now, right, if I really have faith, it's not that that goes away. It's not that that vanishes. It's not that that doesn't happen. But because of what I know to be true down the line, I can live through it. Including death. Right? Including death. So verse 5. So that one didn't work. Right? First try didn't work. So devil goes back into his bag of tricks. Then the devil took him up into the holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, he shall give his angels charge over you, and in their hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone. A couple of things here. First of all, the devil can quote the Bible too. So, don't trust everybody who comes to you quoting the Bible. But he comes to Jesus, he takes him to the pinnacle, to the highest point of Herod's temple. Right? He says, look, I've read the Psalms. Okay? He says, I've read the Psalms. If you're the Son of God, you're the Messiah, right? According to my reading, right, God's going to protect you. God's going to make sure nothing happens to you. So why don't you just go ahead and toss yourself off here? Right? And wouldn't this be a great way to introduce yourself to the people of Jerusalem? Right? I mean, you want them to believe you're the Messiah. If they see a whole bunch of angels come flying out everywhere to come grab you and pick you up, I mean, right? They're going to be impressed. This would be a good PR move too. Jesus, so why don't you just go for it? Verse 7, Jesus says, it is written again, you shall not tempt the Lord your God. Tempt is a little... He's not, because technically Jesus is the Lord his God. He's not saying to Satan, you shouldn't tempt me. Although he shouldn't. But that tempt there is really test. It's really test. Right? Testing is again the opposite of faith. Right? We've seen a lot of testing in the Old Testament, right? Especially Israel in the wilderness, remember, over and over again. Remember, once they get some meat, once they get some food, then they start complaining about the water. Then once they get some water, they start complaining about where they're going. And on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Right? But testing, most importantly, is they always want a sign. We're going to see they start doing this with Jesus too. Right? But we saw throughout the Old Testament, Gideon was a perfect example. Right? God comes to Gideon and says, look, the Midianites are oppressing your people. You, Gideon, are going to be the big hero. I'm sending you to deliver your people from the Midianites. Let's go. And Gideon says, how do I know that you're really going to have my back? Right? He says to God, how do I know I'm not going to get out there and you're going to change your mind? Right? Kind of the opposite of faith, right? It's kind of the opposite of believing the promise is coming, right? So it's, well, I kind of need some kind of, show me something now, right? And I'll believe you about this down the road. And so Gideon got something. Remember, he had the fleece. He said, well, I'll put the fleece out, right? And then miraculously the next day, everything's damp from the dew, except the fleece is bone dry. Right? And so you'd think Gideon would say, wow, that's pretty impressive. Right? God did that. I guess I can trust him. I'll go out there and fight the Midianites. But no, he actually says, okay, you did the whole dry fleece thing. Right? But if you really want me to go, and I can really trust you, then tomorrow night, make the fleece wet and everything else dry. How about that? Right? So God does it again. Right? And now the fleece is wet, everything else is dry. You kind of go, He asks for about, if you remember Judges, he asks for about 5 more signs by the time he's done. Right? At every step of the way. But the people are going to do this to Jesus too. Jesus is going to come, he's going to tell them the Messiah, he's going to tell them the kingdom is coming, and they're going to, show us a sign, show us something. Right? Let us see something, then we'll believe you. Then we'll believe you. And sometimes he says things like, you just saw those 1,000 people I healed, And generally they're not satisfied. Generally they're like, give me something else, right? And sometimes he just tells them, look, I'm not doing anything for you, right? Nothing. Right? You need to believe or not. But that's what this is getting at. Right? That's what this is getting at on 2 levels. Right? Number 1, Jesus is saying he trusts his Father. He doesn't need to have a little test here, like, okay, I'm going to jump off this, and you can't, right? He doesn't need that, and he's not going to put on that display for the people of Jerusalem either. Right? The people of Jerusalem are either going to believe him or not. They're either going to choose to follow his Father and him or not. Right? He's not doing magic tricks to try and impress everybody and wow them, right? and get them to follow him. Okay. So that's 2 down. 2 down for the devil. But see, the thing is with the devil, it's not 2 out of 3. He's just got to get you once. Right? You can beat him, 999 times, but he gets that one, right? And things go bad. So he keeps trying. So verse 8, again the devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. Part 3 of the bag of tricks. A couple of things. First, what was the last big temptation that Israel fell to in these early years? There's idolatry. But I'm going even further than that when I say last. After the conquest, after Joshua, right? When they got into the kingdom, we want a king like everybody else. We don't want God to be our king. Remember, the whole purpose of God calling Israel and making them a nation was for them to be different than everybody else, right? That was the whole point. The whole point of the project, right? Was that they would be different than everybody else. And they're saying, no, we want to be like everybody else. Seriously, no. Right? That's their last. They want to have a king. They want to be just like Moab and Ammon and all the other Egypt that they just left. Right? All the other kingdoms, they want to be just like them. Right? They want to be just like them. Well, Satan, and notice here, he can do this. This tells you who's running Earth's governments. But Satan says, look, all the kingdoms of the world, right? Not just the Roman Empire. We got the Roman Empire over here, right? We got the Roman Empire over here with Tiberius running the show, claiming he's a god on earth. But we got the Persian Empire coming back. We got an empire going on in China. We got an empire going on in India, right? But more importantly, right? Satan, again, not a dummy, has read the Bible, obviously. He knows where this story's going. He knows where this story's going. He knows that Jesus has a pretty hard road ahead of him. Right? Remember what gospel means that we talked about last time. Gospel means the report of a victory. This is the first skirmish. This isn't the final showdown. He knows that Jesus is there to conquer him, to conquer Satan and all his kingdoms, right? To destroy them and establish the kingdom of God instead. So what Satan's really offering him here is a shortcut. It's a shortcut. It's to make it easy. Right? Hey, why go through all the suffering, all the crucifixion, the death? Why go through all that? I'll give you all this. Right? Why overthrow it and build something else? Look what I've built. I'll give it to you. Right? If you worship him instead of God. Right? And so this temptation isn't just one that was thrown at Israel and one that was thrown at Jesus, but this is the temptation that gets thrown at all of us. Right? Because just like Israel, every one of us who is a Christian, according to St. Paul in Ephesians, we've all been called. We're all chosen. For a purpose. Right? For a purpose. Not God's chosen to save us and send us to heaven and send everybody else to hell. Sorry, John Calvin. Right? That's not why. Right? He's chosen us for a purpose very similar to the purpose for which he chose Israel. He's chosen us so that we can work out our salvation in the middle of this sinful world and that other people could see us in the church doing that and be drawn to find their salvation as well. Right. But there's always this other offer. Why do you want to be different? Why do you want to be different? We're having a lot of fun over here. Right? We got money, we got power, we got fun times and enjoyment. Right? Sure, it only lasts for a little while, but nothing lasts forever. Right? You don't even last forever. You're going to die. Right? Have fun while it lasts. Right? Have fun while it lasts. Be like everybody else. Right? You'll fit in better. People like you more. Short term. Right? Short term. The short term, this will be so much easier for you, so much better for you. So you'll be so much, quote unquote, happier. Right? If you do this in the short term. Which again, like the other two temptations we saw, this is trying to undermine faith. Because what is faith? Faith is believing that the promises are true in the future. Right? In the future. Forget about those promises. Right? Forget about those promises. They did this experiment. You can look it up on YouTube. It's kind of demented, but they got these little kids, these little like 4 and 5-year-old kids, and they put a marshmallow on a plate, and they set them down at a table, and they say, we're going to leave this room for 5 minutes. Whatever happens, happens. Right? They say, you can eat the marshmallow, you cannot eat the marshmallow. They say, but if we come back after 5 minutes and the marshmallow is still there, we'll give you 2 marshmallows. 2. And if you watch this video of these kids, right, it's a hidden camera, and these kids are just sitting there agonizing. Most of them. Some of them just grab the marshmallow, they don't care. But some of them are just agonizing. They're staring, they're pounding the table, trying to resist eating this marshmallow to try and get 2 marshmallows. Right? Because we almost instinctively, as human beings now, go for the instant gratification. Right? This is going to make me happy now. Bird in the hand's worth 2 in the bush, right? This is going to make me happy now. This is what right now. So I'm going for it. I'm going for it. Forget about down the road. I'll worry about down the road. Right? I'll worry about the consequences later, maybe. Right? But more likely I'll do what I just did now and try to go for the instant gratification then too. Right? It's built into us. And so this is showing us, again, this third temptation, one that we're weak to. God has plans for us and desires for us that are beyond what we can even imagine. Right? Beyond what we can even imagine. That's what He's offering us when He offers us eternal life, and eternal life with Him in particular. Right? It's joy and peace and love beyond what we can imagine. But to get there, we have to go through some suffering. We have to be patient. We have to struggle a little bit. Right? And so even though what He's offering us is a whole lot better than food or sex or money or power, right? The food and the sex and the money and the power we can have right now. Right? We can have right now. We don't have to go through all that to get it. And so we make bad trades. Right? We make bad trades. Like when I got my first paycheck and I went out and spent it all on comic books. Right? None of it in the savings account. All of it in the comic books. Right? None of which were worth anything later, if that's where you thought this was going. Right? Bad choices, right? Without taking our faith in the ultimate. Right? And so Jesus responds to Satan in verse 10. And Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and Him only shall you serve." Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and ministered to him. So, in our 40-day wilderness experience, Israel failed pretty badly. Right? Remember, there were only two of the original Israelites, Joshua and Caleb, who made it into the land of Canaan. And it was about 180,000, according to Exodus, who left Egypt. 2 out of 180,000, not a great record there, right? But Jesus succeeds where they failed. Now, verse 12, we shift again. Now, when Jesus heard that John had been put in prison, He departed to Galilee. Time for me to quickly draw a bad map. And yes, that kidney is the Sea of Galilee. Theoretically, here in my map. So, we've been, right? Here's the wilderness we've been talking about, right, on the other side of the Jordan. Here's the Jordan where Jesus was baptized and where John was baptized, right? Jerusalem and everything are over here. Well, Herod, our friend from the early chapters, who was killing everybody, isn't done yet. He's arrested John now. He's thrown John in prison. So Jesus, rather than going straight across here in His ministry, goes back up here. Actually around. Back over here. Back over here. Now, first of all, remember, that's where Nazareth is. So he's going back to where he's from. Now, originally we know he's from Bethlehem, Matthew's told us, but he grew up in Nazareth. So he's going back to the area around Nazareth. Going back, though, into the Old Testament, and a little bit of politics. This region is called Galilee up here. This is the Sea of, this kidney is supposed to be the Sea of Galilee, like I said, also known as Lake Chinnereth. We have the Dead Sea down here. Remember in the Old Testament when Joshua brought the people into the land, the people mostly settled in this area, right? They mostly settled in this area. There was one tribe that was sort of the problem child. Remember? The tribe of Dan. Tribe of Dan. And they were predicted that they were going to kind of be a problem child. Dan decided rather than coming in and settling where God told them to settle, right? God gave each tribe, he said, you guys as families, I'm giving this piece of land. To you guys as families, I'm giving this piece of land. And I'm with you, just go take it. Right? Offered Dan a nice piece of land. But Dan said, you know what? There's this city up here by the Sea of Galilee that's already there. Right? They've already got buildings, they've built, they've got port access there, the Sea of Galilee, so it's fishing. Right? It's along the trade route coming in here from the Fertile Crescent. It's a great spot. So the tribe of Dan went, murdered everyone in that city and took it. Right? Murdered everyone in that city and took it. That's how the land of Galilee gets started in Israel's history. Okay? This is not a great place. Right? This is a place with a troubled history, shall we say. Okay? It starts from there and it goes on. Remember when the kingdom of Israel splits, there's the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And Jeroboam, who was the first king of the northern kingdom of Israel, said, you know, I'm really losing out on a lot of tourism dollar with my people going down to Jerusalem to go to the temple. I need to keep that money here in the northern kingdom. So he said, well, what I'll do is I'll set up religious shrines, right, in two places in my kingdom, one in the north and one in the south, convenient access, right, two branches. And that way they'll stay in country when they go and worship. And so he built a golden calf right around here in Bethel. And he built the other one, guess where? Dan. Right? The city of Dan. Our second golden calf. So when the northern kingdom of Israel was destroyed by the Assyrians, the Phoenicians who lived up here moved down in here. And some Samaritans moved in here. And we had a whole bunch of interbreeding. Right? And so by the time we're talking about now, in the 1st century AD, when Jesus lives here, they typically refer to Galilee as Galilee of the Gentiles. Because these are sort of, they're not quite Samaritans. They're close, right? They're kind of our cousins we keep up in the attic and we don't want to talk about so much, right? They're Jews technically, right? Okay, this is not something you don't show up and proudly in Jerusalem and proudly say, "I'm from Galilee." Right? That doesn't happen. Or in one of the other Gospels, remember Nathaniel, the disciple, when he's told about Jesus and how can anything good come out of Nazareth? Yeah. That's the reputation up here. Okay, that's the reputation up here. So, after his first showdown here with the devil, where does Jesus start? We've talked about what his mission is. Right? His mission is take back the land and ultimately the world. Right? from Satan, right? Sort of a new, spiritual level, a new conquest like Joshua. Where does he start? Starts the worst place. Right? Starts the worst place. Right? It's like when I get my dinner plate, there's the vegetables over there. And I start there so that by the time I'm done, I don't taste the vegetables anymore. Go for the worst part first. Right? So John gets thrown into prison. Jesus goes back to Galilee. Okay. Verse 13, and leaving Nazareth, we're going to see some of the other Gospels are going to tell us what happened in Nazareth. Matthew kind of passes over it in silence. He left Nazareth. He came and dwelt in Capernaum, which is by the sea, in the regions of Zebulun and Naphtali. Capernaum was about there. And it was another fishing town. That it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light, and upon those who sat in the region in shadow of death, light is dawned. If you go and look that up in Isaiah, this one's easy, because that's pretty much exactly what Isaiah is talking about. Isaiah, there's no, that doesn't make sense here. Isaiah is very clearly talking about the Messiah coming. Right? And for the same reason, regarding this region, he starts there. Those who dwelt in darkness. Right? Those of us who are in the worst shape, right? We're the first ones to get to see the light. Verse 17, from that time Jesus began to preach and to say, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That's important to kind of stick a tack in this, because there's several times where we're going to get told what Jesus is preaching, and it's going to change. Right? What Jesus is talking about when he speaks to the people. So right now what he's saying is very similar to what St. John the Forerunner was saying. Remember, he was out there telling them to repent. Right? That fire was coming. Right? Axe is at the root of the tree. So right now the message that Jesus is bringing is the same one. Right? Meaning, you've read in the prophets in the last days, the Messiah is going to come, God is going to return, there's going to be this judgment, there's going to be this reckoning. Well, guess what? It's about to happen, so you better sort things out. Because the judgment's right here. Right? It's right here. Now it's in that context that we get now. So Jesus is traveling around Galilee, preaching this message. You need to repent, because destruction's about to come upon you. That in verse 18, and Jesus walking by the Sea of Galilee saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Then he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. They immediately left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets. He called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. So, I know you've read other Gospels and it happens in a different order. Okay? But we're just reading Matthew now. In Matthew, our first four disciples are St. Peter, St. Andrew, and St. James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Okay. Now we need to, sometimes again we read over this fast. Right? We say, oh yeah, they were fishing. It's kind of a crummy job. I'd want to get away from it too. Right? They're sewing the nets, Right? I'd probably take a break and go hear what Jesus had to say too. That's not what's happening here. Right? When he says, come follow me, the word that's translated follow means to become a disciple. Right? To become a follower. Right? It means come join me. Right? So he's not asking him just, hey man, come over here a second. Right? He's saying, give up what you're doing now. Right? And come for the future, right? Become my disciple, become part of this movement I'm doing. And the way the economy worked in villages like this is fishermen, if you could get to own your own boat, right? If you could get to own your own boat, you were kind of an independent contractor. So the way it's presented here, St. Peter owned his own boat. So St. Peter actually was fairly well-to-do for Galilee. I mean, you know. You got to kind of preface that, you know. Kind of like being the richest guy in Parkersburg, West Virginia, you know. You're doing pretty good, but, you know, you're not exactly Manhattan, right? So Peter's doing pretty good, right? He's got his own boat. James and John, their father Zebedee, has his own boat. Right? They're working his boat, but presumably one of them would inherit it when he died. This allowed you, if you had your own boat, that allowed you to become an independent contractor, meaning you could go out on the sea, you could catch fish, you'd sell the fish for whatever the going rate was, right? And you could make a decent living for Galilee. This was not a highly educated profession, right? They probably had zero schooling, right? This is something that was passed down in your family. You'd go out like James and John did. You'd go out with your father, and he would teach you how to do it, right? And then pass on his boat to you. And you try to work your way up to where you had your own boat. If you didn't own your own boat, then you were really in trouble because you had to split all the money with whoever did own the boat. Right? So that made it much more difficult to earn a living. So when Jesus comes up to them, and they're mending their net because, you know, you get holes in the nets, you have to keep them, you can't just go buy new nets, right? You have to keep them working, you have to keep sewing them up. When Jesus comes up and says, leave this boat here and come follow me, right? This is not a small thing. Right? This is years of work. This is their career and their livelihood, right? They may not be able to come back and get this boat, right? If things don't turn out well, right? This is on the level of when he says to some people, "Sell everything that you have and give it to the poor." Right? They're giving up their way of making a living. They're giving up their financial security, right? We know Peter was married and had children. James and John are abandoning their father, right, to work the boat by himself. So on all these levels, this is a serious commitment, right? This is a serious commitment. And they're giving up everything they know to bet on Jesus, right? And this is a person who, number one, is from Nazareth, which is even poorer than Capernaum, right? Who has no home, doesn't own a boat, right? Has no home, no wealthy family supporting him, nothing to speak of. We're just going to go wander the countryside and preach. But Andrew, Peter, James, and John say, yes. Right? They say yes. So that's they're displaying a level of faith already at this first decision, right? That is immense. That is immense. This is not just a little thing. Okay. Verse 23, and Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease among the people. Then his fame went throughout all Syria, and they brought to him all sick people who were afflicted with various diseases and torments, and those who were demon-possessed, epileptics, and paralytics. And he healed them. Great multitudes followed him from Galilee and from Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and beyond the Jordan. So first of all, notice there's a little change in what he's preaching. He's now preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and we talked about what gospel means last time. He's now talking about not just that the kingdom's here and about to come, but that the kingdom is going to be victorious. Well, what does that mean? Remember the vision in Daniel that Nebuchadnezzar had, right? Nebuchadnezzar had this vision of this statue, had a gold top that represented the Babylonian Empire, silver midsection that represented the Persian Empire, bronze legs represented the Greeks, and then iron legs that represented the Romans, right? And then this big boulder that God cut out with his own hand came and smashed it all. Right? Came and smashed it all. And then that boulder grew into a mountain that filled the whole earth, right? Representing the kingdom of God coming and smashing those kingdoms. That's what Jesus, again, there's a shift here. That's what Jesus is now preaching as he goes into the synagogues in Galilee. Not just, there's a reckoning coming and you need to get right, but the time is coming when Rome, Herod, etc., 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 Satan, who stands behind them, as we just saw, right, is the one who's given them control of these places, are about to be smashed. And the kingdom is going to come. Okay. And in tandem with that, he's healing people from all manner of diseases. Why? Because, well, we just saw that quote from Isaiah. One of the things Isaiah said was that in the kingdom, everyone would be healed. Right? The dead would be raised, the blind would see, the dead would walk. So, the fact that Jesus is doing this, the fact that the blind can see, the lame walk, right? The demons are coming out of people. This means that what he's saying isn't just so much talk, right? There have been a lot of would-be messiahs. There are going to be more, right? Coming around talking about how they're going to overthrow the Romans, or now's the time, and this and that. But Jesus, right? Jesus has these healings that are going on at the same time. And so you notice, interestingly, it doesn't say, and so his fame spread to all the Jewish people who embraced him warmly. It said, yea, our Messiah, the deliverance of God, is here. Notice it says his fame spread in Syria. That'll be up over here. That's where Decapolis is, the 10 cities. Right? That would be up here. Now there are people from Judea, it says, and people from beyond the Jordan, from the Transjordan over here. There's people from all over coming to follow him. Right? But his fame is spreading sort of everywhere else. Right? This is St. Matthew being a little subtle, right? To point out what's going to happen ultimately. Right? Because what's going to happen ultimately, as we're going to see in the book of Acts sort of laid out, is that the Jewish people aren't going to embrace Jesus. And it's going to be precisely people like the Syrians, right? It's going to be and the Galileans, Galilee of the Gentiles. It's going to be the Gentiles who come and embrace Christ, and not the Jews. St. Matthew sort of telegraphing that to us a little bit here, right? That already from the very beginning of his ministry, right, his people aren't the ones who are flocking to embrace him, right? But it's all the people who, at least in the Old Testament days, weren't God's people who are coming to Christ.
Father, are we supposed
Yeah.
to take it literally that if people were demon possessed, or were they mentally ill, or what? If they were, why were so many people demon possessed back then?
Here's why. Our question, just in case for the recording, was, are these people really all demon possessed? Or is this like, some people will say, oh, this is talking, they didn't understand mental illness, right? That kind of thing. And if it is really that these people are demon possessed, why were so many people demon possessed? Right? In running around in Judea and its environments. Part of this is we have to understand the pagan religion at the time and how it worked. We talked about this a little bit in the Old Testament in terms of idolatry. Especially at this time in history, right, we're basically talking about outside of the faithful Jewish people. We're talking about Greco-Roman paganism, which at this point has kind of blended in. They sort of picked up stuff from some Eastern religions. They've kind of picked up some Egyptian stuff and kind of blended it all into this big pagan melange, right, of worship. And so part of their belief, what they're worshiping, right, the gods, are spirits, right, are spirits. And in Greek, there are a few different words for what they're worshiping. There's There's of course theos, which means God, right? So there's gods, and then the feminine form, theos, for goddesses, right? And then, I know this is subtly different, and I write it in Greek only because I'm still paying for it. Theos, spelled that way, which means sort of like divine beings, sort of like demigods, you might say. And then the lowest level on the spirit list were daimon, which is the word we transliterate as demon. They called them daimon. Right? They called them that. That's a Greek word for the spirits they worship. And the daimon were ancestral spirits. That's what made them the lowest on the pole. Lowest on the totem pole is that. I mean, the gods proper, you're talking about like the Titans, like Cronus, time, Gaia, the earth, right? These sort of huge concepts. Whereas daimon would be like my dead great-great-great-great-grandpa, who was a war hero, right? And so because he was a war hero and did these great deeds, he has some swing in the afterlife, and so we worship him too on the side. That's the lowest level. So when, for example, St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians, all the gods of the nations are daimon, right? What he's saying, I mean, we translate as all the gods of the nations are demons. And we think, wow, St. Paul, that's not ecumenical at all, right? Can't you be a little nicer? Yeah, can't you be a little nicer? But that word didn't have the stigma at the time that it does now. Right? What he was saying was, what St. Paul was saying in the original context was, all those gods who are being worshipped, that the Romans worship and think aren't God. Right? Only God is God. They're these sort of lesser spirits. Right? Now, he's also going to say they're unclean spirits. So, it's not that he likes them, right? But,
so if your grandfather throws you into the fire, you're probably better off worshiping something.
Right. Yeah. But so, in order to interact with these spirits, right? They're spirits, they don't have bodies. Okay. So, in order to interact with these spirits, these beings, right? In order to make them present, they needed to have a body. And there are two ways you could get a body for one of the spirits you were worshiping in Greco-Roman religion. One was, you make a statue. Right? That's where the idolatry part comes in. Right? So they believed, for example, you go to Athens, you go to the great temple of Athena. It was one of the wonders of the ancient world, this huge 3-story statue of Athena they had there. Okay? They believed that when they came there and offered the sacrifices, by offering the sacrifices, they were inviting Athena to come there, that Athena would come into the statue, right? And she would then be there present, so they could ask her questions, they could ask her to do stuff for them, right? Whatever else they wanted to do there, right? And then Athena would either accept or reject their offering, right? That's how they thought that worked. The other way to interact with a spirit was for that spirit to take possession of a human body. And probably the most famous example of that in the Greco-Roman world were the oracles. The most famous one of those being the oracle at Delphi, the city of Delphi. The oracle at the city of Delphi was possessed by Apollo. And again, this isn't Christians coming in and saying, oh, that spiritual priestess woman is actually demon-possessed. They said she was possessed by Apollo. That's their description. And so she would, through a ritual, right, become possessed by Apollo, and then people could come to her and ask her questions, right, about what's going to happen in the future. Should I go into battle Tuesday or Thursday, right? When should I invest? Should I buy or sell? Right? All those kinds of questions, and communicate with the spirit that way. Okay. And in addition to that, that was sort of the institutionalized form of possession. On a less institutionalized level, a lot of the religious festivals involved inviting various spirits to come in and take possession of your body. So, for example, at Rome, one of the biggest, most popular festivals was the Bacchanalia. And there's an English word, bacchanal, for a debauched party. That comes from that. Bacchus was the Roman god of wine. So when the wine harvest came in every year, they had this huge 2-week-long festival called the Bacchanalia. And in this festival, people would essentially stay up very late at night, get very drunk, and invite these spirits called the Bacchae to come and possess them. And they'd run through the streets, generally having outdoor promiscuous sex and engaging in random acts of violence and vandalism and destruction. But this was part of the culture, right? So it was accepted that a certain amount of damage was going to be done, right? Sort of like Halloween in the old days. Kids are going to soap some windows and kids are going to break some things, but sort of on a bigger level with more rape and more burning. So that's. But so these kind of festivals were part of the culture too. So by participating in the pagan religion, right, a lot of people ended up demon possessed. A lot of people ended up demon possessed. Many of them on purpose. Right? Many of them on purpose. Some maybe not on purpose. Right? But we see another example of this when we get to the book of Acts. There's a slave girl who's possessed by a demon, and the guys who own her use her to make money doing fortune telling, right? Because she's possessed. Well, St. Paul and Barnabas run into her and cast the demon out of her, and so her owners get really ticked off, right? Because they're like, "Hey, that was our way of making a living. Where did you get off?" Right? Casting the demon out of her, right? So this phenomena is something that the pagans and Christians and Jews all accepted was going on at the time. Right? Was going on at the time. It was a specific spiritual phenomenon. It's just the Christians, of course, had a different, and the Jews had a different view of it than the pagans did. The pagans viewed it as a positive thing. The Jews and the Christians viewed it as a negative thing because they viewed those spirits as unclean and ultimately out to do man harm rather than good. So that's why. And if you talk to people who do missionary work, like in parts of Africa, where there isn't a Christian presence, where God hasn't preached yet, they'll tell you there's still a lot of demon possession in the world, in those areas. It's less common in places where Christianity has been preached and a lot of the population is converted to Christianity, but you go places where that's not true, and there's still a lot of this kind of spiritual phenomenon because they're still worshiping in a lot of the same way.
Well, just one thing we might want to consider is the fact that in many Asian countries, you still have ancestral worship. However, in the United States of America, what's the difference from what you have said at this particular period of time than that of seances, that of games like Dungeons and Dragons that have certain chants?
Don't pick on Dungeons and Dragons.
I'm sorry.
You mean Ouija boards, right?
Ouija boards. So what really then is the difference that we're looking at? Not much other than maybe it's legal.
Well, no, yeah, that was he was asking about basically Spiritism, especially in the early 20th century, where there was a huge societal.
The great escape artist, Houdini.
Yeah.
What he did.
Yeah. So and there's not. I mean, that is a very similar thing. Ouija board. I mean, I know Parker Brothers makes them, so people think, oh well, it's a board game. But I'll say this about Ouija boards. Every, crystal worshiping psychic I've ever met, and every Christian priest I've ever met, has said, don't mess with Ouija boards. And if those two groups agree, probably take it to the bank. Right? It's probably a bad idea. Right? But yeah, no, that is a similar kind of, and for similar purposes, wanting to communicate with the dead, wanting to communicate. And of course we saw that with Saul in 1 Samuel, trying to communicate with Samuel after his death through the witch at Endor. Yeah.
May I just interrupt the class and give you a historical fact on Ouija board?
Okay.
Well, when I was in seminary, we had a young couple there, and I noticed they maybe would come to class and maybe not. And I happened to ask, why were they in class, or what's the deal here? And other people asked. They were from California. And they,
Oh, no one good has ever come out of California.
I know what you mean. I was like, wow. But anyway, they were messing with the Ouija. And the long and short of it was, at night, the birds were hitting the house. Birds do not fly at night.
Yeah.
And in the morning, there was about 200 to 300 birds, this fellow told us. And he and his wife literally ran out, got in the car, and what they were doing in these various seminaries were getting protection and everything through prayer and fasting. And nice looking young men. So I just wanted to let you know that those things still exist around as well.
Yeah. Okay. I have this inner need to get done with more than one chapter. I heard the pages flipping. We're not going to get done with 2 chapters. But I want to do this next piece. We're going to start chapter 5 here. Just on principle, darn it. Now, chapter 5 here is the beginning of a somewhat famous piece of St. Matthew's Gospel, but it's typically known as the Sermon on the Mount. Let me go ahead, let me read the introduction, and then I'll pause and go into what I was about to say. Chapter 5, verse 1. Seeing the multitudes, he went up on a mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came to him. Then he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, and I'll stop there. Okay. So, the reason why it's called the Sermon on the Mount is because he's on a mountain. But, remember at the beginning I said we need to be looking for these little clues. Because in some of the other Gospels, Jesus is going to say some of these same things, but he's not going to say them on a mountain. St. Matthew makes the point that he's giving this sermon that's going to take up the next couple of chapters on a mountain. Anybody see a mountain? All right, Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai, right? So, following here, Jesus has this people, right? He's called his disciples, sort of his inner circle of disciples, but he's also received this group of people from St. John. Plus, he's got these people from Syria and all over the place who have heard about him by reputation, who have come and joined this group. He's got this group around him now, right? And so just like after God had brought Israel out of Egypt in the Exodus and had this group, right? What did God do? He went to the mountain, brought them to the mountain, and he taught them, right? Torah means, we usually translate it as law, but it really means teaching, right? Teaching. He said, I brought you out of the land of Egypt, here's what I now expect of you. And as if to drive the point home, there's this strange expression in verse 2, that he opened his mouth and taught them, saying. And you're like, well, yeah, he opened his mouth. He wasn't doing ventriloquism, right? I mean, you're going to talk, you're going to open your mouth, right? Well, remember how they received the Torah at Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
Right? Remember, they were scared. Right? They saw the thunder and lightning and the darkness on top of the mountain. Right? They were all scared, so they all kind of shoved Moses. You go up there and talk to him, right? You see what he wants, right? They sent Moses, but when Moses went up there into the darkness, it's usually translated in English as God spoke to Moses face to face. Right? Do you remember that? He spoke to him face to face. What it literally says in the Hebrew is that God spoke to Moses mouth to mouth. Mouth to mouth. Meaning it went from God's lips to Moses' lips to the people's ears. Right? So that's why St. Matthew puts it here this weird, he opened his mouth. Right? He opened his mouth. This is referring us back to that. But notice, it's not that he went and talked to God. It's straight from his mouth. Right? We've cut out the middleman. We've cut out the Moses. Right? Middleman's gone. He's now speaking directly to his people. So this sermon that we're going to hear tonight and next week, and if I keep going the way I am for the next 8 weeks, I don't know, is this Sermon on the Mount is, St. Matthew is deliberately presenting this as a new Torah, right? As a new teaching, as a new law that's being given. It's being given now to the people, to this new people who are going to be the people of a new covenant. Of a new covenant. So we'll start out here. This is probably all we'll do tonight with the next few verses, which are known as the Beatitudes. Right? Beatitude is from a Latin word that means happiness, literally. If you want to be really literal, it means happiness. This is why I think it's great that the patriarchs, other than the Patriarch of Constantinople in the Orthodox Church, are known as his Beatitude, because that literally means his happiness. So our patriarch is actually, if you translate it into English, his happiness, John the 10th. So that's what Beatitude means. The word that in Greek very literally means blessed or blessed, and that's how it's usually translated in English now, rather than as happy. But the connotation of the word in Greek, what it means to be blessed, is more the idea that this is someone in some cases, this is someone to be envied, but this is someone to be looked up to. This is someone to be admired, right? This is the person who you should use as a role model. So, if we stop and just think about it before we read, right? What kind of people would we expect to see, right? Culturally, for our culture, right? Who do we want to have? Somebody who started with nothing and got rich, right? That's a good one, right? That's somebody we, in our culture, right? Somebody didn't have anybody, dirt poor. Every politician says, they were born under a log cabin, and eventually, they made it there. Now, they're going to help save everyone, right? Right. So somebody who had nothing and now has made something of themselves, right? That's somebody we look at, or just somebody who's very good at what they do, right? Even if it's something silly like athletics, right? Somebody's really good at playing basketball or football. They've devoted themselves to a craft and they're really good at it, right? That's somebody to look up to, right? Or somebody who's has a lot of accomplishments under their belt, right? They've for example, the guy who won the Nobel Peace Prize for genetically engineering wheat that would grow in sub-Saharan Africa, right? Fed billions of people, right? There's a guy who we'd look up to and emulate. Well, I hate to give you spoilers. None of those people is going to be on this list. Right? None of those people are going to be on this list. So let's read this list and see who the people are who Jesus is telling us we should try to be like, who we should admire and try to be like. Verse 3, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Well, we'll start there. Right? Now this isn't referring to, now I know you've read Luke. And when St. Luke presents this, he presents it a little differently, and he is literally talking about poor people. Here he's talking about people who are poor in spirit, right? Meaning people who are, right, humble, right? They're humble, particularly religiously humble. This would be your opposite of a Pharisee, right? We've talked about the Pharisees a couple times, right, in class. These are people who do not consider themselves good to be people. The people who consider themselves to be sinners, right? People who are, from the perspective of the religion at the time, religious failures. Okay. So right off the bat, Jesus says, you should try to be more like those sinners, because they're the ones who are going to inherit the kingdom of heaven. Huh? Okay. Verse 4, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Now think culturally, right? Culturally, to be blessed at this time means what? You've got a wife, you've got a lot of children, right? You can't have children, or if your children die, your spouse dies and you don't have an heir, you're what? You're cursed. By definition to them, you're cursed. Right? Remember Job, all his friends coming to him, what did you do? You know, that all these horrible things happened to you. Right? And even into the Gospels, remember Jesus' disciples see the man who was born blind and say, who sinned, him or his father, that he is? Right? Somebody must have done something wrong. Right? Jesus said, no, you should envy people who are in mourning. You should try to be like people who are in mourning, people who have suffered loss. Why? Because God is going to comfort them. Verse 5, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. That's a little bit of a mistranslation. It doesn't actually say the earth, it says the land. Right? And when we see land in the Bible, we're talking about what? This land. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the land. Who are the meek? The quiet, the soft-spoken. We have to remember, who is it who's concerned about the land right now in Judea? Who want to take the land back? It's the zealots, right? The zealots who are like looking back to the Maccabees and saying, we need to overthrow the Romans. We need to overthrow the Romans, take back this land that God gave to us, set up our kingdom. Right? And they're going to do that how? By violence. Right? By violence. We're going to attack the Romans, we're going to overthrow them, we're going to take this land back for ourselves. Jesus says, it's the meek, the quiet, the soft-spoken, the peaceful. Those are the people who are going to inherit the land. Those are the people who are going to receive the land. Verse 6, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Now again, I know we've read Luke. It's not talking about people who are literally hungry and thirsty. Hunger and thirst for righteousness. Where that's translated here, righteousness, a lot of the times is better translated justice. Justice. Who are people who hunger and thirst for justice? People who have had injustice committed upon them. Right? People who have had injustice committed, people who have suffered unjustly. Right? They're people who want justice. They want justice to be done. Jesus is saying, you should want to be like people who have suffered injustice. Those are the people you should emulate. Those are the people you should emulate. The people who have been downtrodden, the people who have been stepped on, the people who the Romans have oppressed. Those are the people you should try to be like. Why? Because they're going to receive their justice. They're going to receive their justice. And when that justice comes, that justice is going to cut both ways. It's going to cut both ways. It says that they're going to receive justice for the injustice that's been committed on them, and those who have committed that injustice are going to receive justice too. Verse 7, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. You should want to emulate and be like those people who show mercy to other people, who show kindness to other people, right? Who not only deal with people justly, but go beyond what's just and right and fair. Right? Do better than what's just and right and fair. Treat people better than they deserve to be treated. Right? Why? Because they're going to be treated better than they deserve to be treated. Verse 8, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Notice it's pure in heart, not outwardly pure. Not like the Pharisees with the tassels on their garments and the white and the washing and the people who are pure in their heart. Because being pure in heart, they'll be able to see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Again, not the people who are trying to come and overthrow the Romans. Not the people who are trying to set up the kingdom themselves. The people who are making peace. Not the people who want to win. Right? We want to emulate winners. Right? In our way of thinking, somebody wins and somebody loses, and we want to be on the winning side. Right? Jesus is saying, no, the people you should envy, the people you should want to be like, are the ones who make peace, so that nobody loses and everybody wins. Right? Where there's not winners and losers, because that's how God operates. Remember in the Old Testament, right? God chooses Isaac. He doesn't just throw Ishmael out to die. Abraham does. But God doesn't. God blesses Hagar and Ishmael too, even though they're not the ones he chose. Right? He chooses Jacob. He doesn't just throw Esau to the side. Right? He blesses Esau as well. Right? God can love and choose someone without rejecting someone else. Right? There doesn't have to be a winner and a loser. He can love everyone. He can bless everyone. Right? And so when we're peacemakers, when we go out and do that, when we make it a situation where there's not a winner and a loser, where everyone wins and no one loses, that's why we're called sons of God. Right? Sons of God, in this context, means someone who manifests his character. Right? You're a son of blank means, right? You resemble him. And our love resembles God's love when we do that. Verse 10, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This is coming back to what we were talking about back at the beginning. Right? Those people who, unlike Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who get thrown into the fire and don't survive, those are the people Jesus is telling us we should want to be like. We should want to be like the people who suffer for the sake of what's right. Who suffer for the sake of what's right. Because they are the ones who inherit the kingdom of heaven. And then finally in verse 11, blessed are you when they revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. A couple things to note there. First, the word falsely there is very important. It doesn't say, blessed are you when people hate you, period. Right? It says, blessed are you when people hate you and do all these things, do all this evil to you falsely, right? Not because of our sins. Not we're getting what we deserve because of our conduct, but falsely. And for Christ's sake. For Christ's sake. That we, as followers of Christ, he's telling us here, right? He's telling us here, this is what you should expect. Right? This is what you should expect. If you're really following me, right? Because, of course, this would be the logic. This is going all the way back to Psalm 1, right? You follow the Lord and you're blessed, right? Makes sense, right? I'm going to receive blessings. Well, here Jesus is telling us the kind of blessings we're going to receive if we really follow him. That's going to be people hating you, people reviling you, people saying all kinds of false, rotten things about you, right? People persecuting you. And Jesus says, when that happens, when you're trying to follow him and that's the result, right? What's our natural feeling? Why is this happening to me? I was finally, in my case, age 40, starting to make some small effort to actually be a good Christian. And now everyone's angry at me, right? I better knock this off. Right? No, that's not the response, right? The response, Jesus says, is rejoice and be exceedingly glad. Jump up and down for joy. Yay! Yay! Everyone hates me, right? Why would you do that? Because he says, read the Old Testament sometime. Look at all the prophets. Look at all the people who followed God in the Old Testament. Right? Well, look what happened to them. Look how they were treated. Right? If you're being treated the same way, you should rejoice because that means you're one of them. That means you're one of them. That means you finally arrived. That means you're really following Christ. And so that is something to be happy about. Why? Well, because as St. Matthew just told us, who is it who runs this world?
The devil.
Right now. The devil. If the devil runs this world, right? The devil runs this world, then, and we're following Christ, should we expect, right, to get along well in the world? Right? So Jesus says, you want a sign? Here's the sign that you're really following me. Nobody likes you. Right? Nobody likes you. They're slandering you. They hate you. Right? That's when you say, congratulations. Mabruk. You're a Christian now. Right? You're a Christian now. So this is the Beatitudes here, just the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus starts out by taking everything the people he's talking to think they understand, right, religion, and turning it on its head. Right? The people who you think are the least important, the meek, the humble, right, the sinners, right, the people who are being persecuted, the people who are in mourning, the people who have suffered loss, the people who have had gross injustices committed to them, all those people who you might sort of pity a little bit on the side. Oh, that's terrible. Right? Those are going to be the first people in line to walk into the kingdom of heaven. Those are the people you should be trying to be like. And so he turns the whole thing on its head. And that's in the first 11 verses. That's in the first few lines. So we'll pick up here next week, get into the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. Right? But it proceeds from here. It proceeds from here. Because who Jesus is and what he preaches is as we've seen, is an exact opposite of what the world believes. So thank you, everybody.